Captain Daniel Brooks had spent more than 20 years in the sky. Flying wasn't just his profession, it was his life's greatest passion. From the day he earned his pilot's license at the age of 23, Daniel had dreamed of commanding the world's most advanced aircraft. Through discipline, thousands of flight hours, and an unshakable commitment to safety, he became one of the most respected captains at Skyworld Airlines. Passengers often applauded when he announced their arrival. His fellow pilots admired his calm judgment. The airline trusted him with its most important international routes. Daniel believed that every person who stepped onto his aircraft trusted him with their lives, and he never took that responsibility lightly. Unknown to him, someone wanted to destroy everything he had built. Skyworld Airlines had recently signed a multi-billion-dollar contract to purchase a new fleet of fuel-efficient aircraft. The agreement would make the airline one of the largest carriers in the region. However, not everyone welcomed the deal. A powerful criminal network had been making millions by supplying counterfeit aircraft parts to smaller maintenance companies. If Skyworld modernized its fleet with stricter inspections and certified components, the illegal operation would collapse. Leading the scheme was Victor Kane, a wealthy aviation contractor with influential connections in the industry. Publicly, Victor appeared to be a successful businessman who sponsored aviation charities and attended international air shows. Behind the scenes, he bribed inspectors, forged maintenance certificates, and sold unsafe aircraft components to companies willing to ignore safety regulations. When Skyworld refused to renew contracts with Victor's companies, he decided to send a message that would terrify every airline considering the same decision. 1 week before Flight 728 departed for London, corrupt mechanics working for Victor secretly gained access to the aircraft during an overnight maintenance check. They replaced a critical hydraulic control valve with a counterfeit component designed to fail under heavy pressure. The sabotage was almost impossible to detect during routine inspections. The maintenance records appeared perfectly legitimate. Every signature was forged. Every seal looked authentic. No one suspected a thing. On the morning of the flight, Daniel arrived at the airport before sunrise, just as he always did. He reviewed the weather reports, studied the flight plan, and personally inspected the aircraft with First Officer Emily Ross, a talented young pilot who had recently joined the airline. "Everything looks good, Captain," Emily reported. Daniel smiled. "Let's bring everyone home safely." Within an hour, Flight 728 was airborne, with 214 passengers and 11 crew members on board. The climb was smooth, the weather was clear. For nearly 2 hours, everything went exactly as planned. Then, without warning, a loud warning tone echoed through the cockpit. A red hydraulic pressure alert flashed across the primary flight display. Emily immediately checked the instruments. "Captain, we're losing hydraulic pressure." Daniel's expression became serious. Hydraulic systems controlled many of the aircraft's essential flight controls. Losing them could quickly become catastrophic. He calmly contacted air traffic control. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday! This is Skyworld Flight 728. We are experiencing a hydraulic system failure and requesting immediate priority landing." The controller responded instantly. "Flight 728, nearest airport is 90 miles east. Emergency services are standing by." Inside the passenger cabin, flight attendants noticed growing concern among travelers as the aircraft began to vibrate slightly. Daniel refused to panic. He had trained for emergencies his entire career. Working methodically with Emily, he followed every emergency checklist. Backup systems activated, alternative flight controls responded, but the damaged hydraulic valve continued to fail. Warning lights multiplied across the cockpit. Emily looked toward Daniel. "If we lose the second system..." Daniel nodded. "I know." The aircraft suddenly lurched to one side. Passengers screamed. Loose luggage fell from overhead compartments. Despite the chaos, Daniel kept his voice calm over the public announcement system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are experiencing a technical problem. Our crew is fully trained for situations like this. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened and follow all instructions from our cabin crew." His steady voice reassured many frightened passengers. Minutes later, the runway came into view. Emergency vehicles lined both sides, flashing bright red and blue lights. Daniel carefully aligned the aircraft for landing. The damaged controls responded sluggishly. Every correction required extraordinary precision. The aircraft crossed the runway threshold slightly faster than normal. The landing gear touched down. For one terrifying moment, it seemed they had succeeded. Then the counterfeit hydraulic valve completely failed. The aircraft violently veered toward the edge of the runway. Daniel reacted instantly. Using every remaining control available, he fought to keep the aircraft from rolling over. After a desperate struggle lasting only seconds, but feeling like an eternity, the aircraft finally skidded to a stop on the grass beside the runway. Silence. Then applause erupted throughout the cabin. Passengers cried with relief. Every single person had survived. News channels across the country praised Captain Daniel Brooks for saving 225 lives through extraordinary skill and courage. But the celebration lasted only a few hours. Investigators examining the damaged aircraft discovered the failed hydraulic component. Instead of treating it as sabotage, early reports suggested improper inspection procedures before departure. The media quickly changed its headlines. Hero pilot under investigation for negligent safety checks. Skyworld Airlines immediately grounded Daniel pending the investigation. His pilot's license was suspended. Reporters gathered outside his home. Former supporters began questioning whether the accident had been caused by pilot error. Watching the evening news, Daniel couldn't understand what was happening. He had followed every procedure. He had inspected the aircraft. Something didn't make sense. As television cameras showed investigators towing away the damaged airplane, Daniel quietly looked at the screen and whispered, "This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted this aircraft to fail." At that moment, hundreds of miles away, Victor Kane watched the same broadcast from his luxurious office. A slow smile spread across his face. The counterfeit part had been destroyed in the crash. The evidence, he believed, had disappeared forever. He had no idea that Captain Daniel Brooks had just begun the most dangerous investigation of his life. The weeks following the emergency landing were the darkest of Captain Daniel Brooks's life. For more than 20 years, he had earned the respect of passengers, fellow pilots, and aviation authorities through flawless professionalism. Now, overnight, his name had become the subject of sensational headlines. Pilot error or mechanical failure? Did Captain Brooks ignore warning signs? Television commentators debated his decisions. Social media exploded with speculation. Some praised him for saving every passenger on board, while others accused him of carelessness. Daniel ignored the rumors. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. The aircraft had not failed because of pilot error. Someone had tampered with it. Official investigators completed their preliminary report a month later. Although they praised Daniel's extraordinary handling of the emergency, they concluded there was insufficient evidence of deliberate sabotage. The report suggested the hydraulic valve had failed because of a manufacturing defect and recommended further technical analysis. Daniel wasn't convinced. Aircraft components were built to strict international safety standards. A critical valve should never have failed so catastrophically, especially one that had supposedly passed inspection only days before the flight. Someone was hiding the truth. One evening, Daniel received an unexpected phone call. It was Emily Ross, the first officer who had flown with him that day. "I found something," she said quietly. They met at a small cafe far from the airport. Emily placed a flash drive on the table. "I copied part of the aircraft's maintenance records before investigators sealed everything." Daniel opened the files on his laptop. At first glance, everything looked normal. Then one detail caught his attention. The hydraulic valve had supposedly been replaced only 3 days before the flight. But the serial number listed in the maintenance log didn't match the manufacturer's official production records. Daniel checked the number again. It belonged to a valve that had been scrapped nearly 2 years earlier. Someone had inserted a fake component into the aircraft and covered it with forged paperwork. "This wasn't an accident," Emily whispered. Daniel nodded. It was planned. The next morning, Daniel contacted an old friend named Marcus Reed, a retired aviation safety inspector known for exposing maintenance fraud. Marcus carefully examined the documents. After several hours, he looked up with a serious expression. "This paperwork is fake." "You can tell?" Marcus pointed to several inspection stamps. "They copied the signatures perfectly. But they used the wrong inspection codes. The forger didn't know the system changed last year." For the first time since the investigation began, Daniel had real evidence. Still, exposing an international aviation conspiracy would require much more than forged paperwork. Marcus suggested visiting one of the warehouses that supplied aircraft components to several regional airlines. Using public records, they traced the suspicious hydraulic valve to a maintenance contractor connected to businessman Victor Kane. The warehouse appeared ordinary. Workers loaded crates onto trucks while supervisors checked inventory. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Marcus noticed something. Several shipping containers carried manufacturer labels that were slightly different from authentic aviation packaging. The logos were almost identical. Almost. Daniel quietly photographed every container. As they prepared to leave, 2 security guards approached. "You gentlemen lost?" Marcus smiled politely. "We were looking for another warehouse." The guards watched until they drove away. Back at Marcus's office, they compared the photographs with official manufacturer catalogs. The differences were unmistakable. Someone was producing counterfeit aircraft parts. But proving they were being installed on commercial airliners would be much harder. Days later, another breakthrough arrived unexpectedly. A nervous warehouse employee secretly contacted Daniel. "My name is Carlos. I've seen things I can't ignore anymore." Carlos agreed to meet late that night. Inside an abandoned parking garage, he handed Daniel a small notebook and several photographs. "I worked quality control. They forced us to approve parts that failed safety tests." He pointed toward one photograph. "This valve. It's identical to the one from Flight 728. Daniel stared at the image. It matched perfectly. Carlos continued. "Victor Kane owns the entire operation. He bribes inspectors. Anyone who refuses disappears from the company." Before Daniel could ask another question, headlights suddenly illuminated the garage. A black SUV sped toward them. Carlos's eyes widened. "They found me!" The vehicle crashed through a barrier. Daniel grabbed Carlos and pulled him behind a concrete pillar just before the SUV slammed into the spot where they had been standing. Masked men jumped out. "Take the notebook!" Daniel and Carlos ran through the parking structure while Marcus called the police. The attackers chased them across several levels before Daniel managed to trigger the building's emergency fire suppression system. Water poured from overhead sprinklers, reducing visibility. Using the confusion, the 3 men escaped through a maintenance exit, moments before police sirens echoed through the streets. The attackers vanished. Back at Marcus's office, Daniel examined the notebook. It contained shipment dates, fake inspection approvals, secret warehouse locations, and coded payment records stretching back nearly 8 years. It was enough to begin exposing the network. But one question remained. How high did the conspiracy reach? Marcus answered with a single sentence. "People moving counterfeit aircraft parts worth millions don't operate alone." Daniel understood immediately. There had to be corrupt officials protecting the operation. Otherwise, it could never have survived for so many years. The following morning, every television station announced the upcoming International Aviation Safety Summit, where airline executives, aviation regulators, aircraft manufacturers, and government officials from around the world would gather to discuss flight safety. Victor Kane was scheduled to deliver the opening keynote speech as a respected aviation supplier. Marcus looked at Daniel. "That's where he'll be." Daniel closed the notebook. "And that's where the truth will finally take off." Neither of them realized that Victor Kane had already learned they were alive and had one final plan to silence Captain Daniel Brooks forever. The International Aviation Safety Summit was the most anticipated event in the aviation industry that year. More than 2,000 delegates from around the world filled the massive convention center. Airline CEOs, aircraft manufacturers, aviation engineers, safety inspectors, government officials, journalists, and commercial pilots gathered to discuss the future of global flight safety. Ironically, the keynote speaker was Victor Kane. To the public, Victor was a respected aviation supplier who had spent years promoting safer skies. Few people knew that behind his polished image was the mastermind of an international counterfeit aircraft parts network. Outside the convention center, dozens of television crews waited to interview industry leaders. Inside, Captain Daniel Brooks quietly walked through the entrance with Marcus Reed, Emily Ross, and Carlos. Waiting for them was Sarah Mitchell, the lead investigator from the National Aviation Safety Authority. Unlike the first investigation, Sarah had secretly reopened the case after receiving Daniel's new evidence. For weeks, her team had verified every document, every shipment, every payment, and every maintenance record. The evidence was overwhelming. She looked at Daniel and smiled. "It's over." Daniel took a deep breath. "I hope so." The conference began. Victor Kane stepped onto the stage as the audience applauded. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began confidently, "aviation safety depends on trust, quality, and responsibility." Daniel couldn't help but shake his head. The man responsible for putting hundreds of innocent lives in danger was giving a speech about safety. Halfway through Victor's presentation, Sarah nodded toward the conference technicians. It was time. The giant screens behind Victor suddenly went black. The audience looked around in confusion. Seconds later, surveillance footage appeared on the screens. The video clearly showed corrupt mechanics entering the maintenance hangar late at night before Flight 728. Another camera angle captured them removing a genuine hydraulic valve and replacing it with a counterfeit one. The room fell silent. Victor's confident smile vanished instantly. "What is this?" he demanded. Then came another video. Warehouse workers secretly stamping fake certification labels onto defective aircraft parts. Another recording revealed inspectors accepting envelopes full of cash. The audience watched in disbelief. Sarah walked onto the stage holding an evidence folder. "These videos have been authenticated by independent forensic experts." She opened the folder. "Along with these recordings, we have financial records, shipping manifests, laboratory reports, witness testimony, and communication logs connecting Victor Kane to an international counterfeit aircraft parts operation." Reporters immediately began broadcasting the story live. Around the world, millions watched the conference unfold. Victor desperately tried to interrupt. "Those documents are fabricated," Sarah calmly continued. "Laboratory analysis confirms that the hydraulic valve recovered from Flight 728 was a counterfeit component manufactured using substandard materials." She turned toward Daniel. "Captain Brooks followed every emergency procedure exactly as required. The aircraft was sabotaged." The audience erupted into applause. Daniel slowly walked onto the stage. For months, he had been blamed for an accident he did not cause. Now the truth stood before the entire world. Victor glared at him. "You've ruined everything." Daniel answered quietly. "No. You ruined it the day you chose greed over human lives." Suddenly, officers from the National Aviation Crime Division entered the hall. Their commander approached Victor. "Victor Kane, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, bribery, forgery, aircraft sabotage, and endangering hundreds of lives." Victor looked toward the exits. There was nowhere to run. As officers placed him in handcuffs, television cameras captured every moment. The same media that had questioned Daniel's reputation now reported the greatest aviation corruption scandal in decades. Over the following months, investigators raided warehouses across the country. Millions of dollars worth of counterfeit aircraft parts were seized. More than 50 corrupt employees, inspectors, and executives were arrested. Several international airlines immediately replaced suspicious components before they could cause future tragedies. Experts later estimated that the investigation had prevented countless aviation accidents. Captain Daniel Brooks was officially cleared of every accusation. His pilot's license was fully restored. Skyworld Airlines offered him his old position back along with a promotion. At a special ceremony, the airline's CEO presented Daniel with the award for exceptional courage and professionalism. Standing before hundreds of pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and passengers whose lives he had helped protect, Daniel accepted the award with humility. "I didn't save Flight 728 alone," he said. "My crew remained calm. The cabin crew protected our passengers. Investigators refused to ignore the evidence. Honest people chose to do the right thing. The audience rose to its feet in applause. Rather than returning immediately to international flights, Daniel founded the Brooks Aviation Safety Foundation, an independent organization dedicated to improving maintenance standards, protecting whistleblowers, and training young aviation professionals to recognize fraud before it could endanger lives. Years later, aviation schools around the world studied Flight 728 as an example of extraordinary professionalism under pressure. Students learned not only about Daniel's remarkable landing, but also about his determination to uncover the truth when the evidence seemed impossible to find. At the entrance of the Foundation's headquarters stood a polished steel plaque, engraved with words that every visitor stopped to read. A pilot's greatest responsibility is not only to fly safely, but to protect the truth that keeps every flight safe. Daniel often smiled whenever he walked past those words. He had lost his reputation. He had nearly lost his career. He had almost lost his life. But because he refused to stop searching for the truth, thousands of future passengers would board aircraft knowing that the skies had become safer. And that, Daniel believed, was the greatest victory of all.